Hey, Don here. Here's Lick of the Day number 160. This is an Aeolian arpeggio sequence. As usual, I'm going to play it once slowly and then break it down. During the breakdown, I'm going to share some practice advice that you can apply to this thing and pretty much anything else you're practicing. If you want the tabs, you can find them in the description below. We start here on the 5th fret of the B string. Alright, so this one is based on the E Aeolian scale. That's the same thing as the A regular E minor scale. So 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7. And we start here on the root, go up 6 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we shift down with the pinky to the 7th fret. And here's where the actual arpeggio sequence starts. So we have this kind of pattern going on. So it's going to be, initially it's going to be a downstroke, but then that's going to be an upstroke, but I'll show that later. So the notes we're playing here is just an E minor triad. So we got the 5th, flat 3 and the root. So 7, 3 and 1. 5 here. Those are the notes, and the sequence goes like this. Down, pull off, down, down, up, pull off. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's the initial pattern. Then we move that up in third. So we, instead of going, which you could do, which sounds quite a lot like the final countdown thing, we move up to this arpeggio instead, the G major arpeggio, and now we get into this superimposition territory, and it's just a fancy name for playing a different arpeggio over a chord type, and basically just extending that arpeggio sound, because everything is heard over this E minor chord. So this G major arpeggio will actually not sound like G major, it will sound like the flat 7, the 5th, and the flat 3, which equals E minor 7 chord. And then we continue up like that, so we get higher and higher extensions as we go higher up the fretboard. So I'm just going to show those first. We got the G major here, so 10, 7, 8. Same picking pattern, except that I do with an upstroke when I shift. So this one is a downstroke because I'm coming from this alternate pick run. Down, pull off, down, down, up, pull off, and then up, pull off, down, down, up, pull off. But it doesn't really matter. If you feel more comfortable with a downstroke, it's fine because you have a pull off in between. So the next arpeggio, again, we move up to a third. In this case, a major third up to this B minor arpeggio. And if we view this in relationship to an E minor chord, in the bottom, you actually get the 9th, flat 7, and the 5th. So that sound equals E minor 9th arpeggio or chord, even though we're only playing 3 notes here. So that's the sort of power of superimposition. Also, it's a very fancy name. And then we move up once more to a D major arpeggio, and that basically gives us the 11th, the 9th, and the flat 7. So that becomes E minor 11 type of sound. So it's just all E minor though, it just sounds a bit fancy. And when it don't get too hung up on like, wow, an 11 or a 9th, what's that? It's just notes out of the scale. So we're not going outside the regular old E minor scale here. It just so happens that when you talk about chords, you start building it doing every other note. So you go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, and then 13. And why there's no 15th chord is because when you go back to 15, then you're back to the root again. So if you look at this, you have 7 notes in the scale, 1, 2, so 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's 7 notes. We covered all the notes. So don't let this music theory stuff be more complicated than it is. It's made up by musicians anyway, so it's not rocket science. And it's just done this way to differentiate between other things. So it just helps to talk about chord tones in this regard instead of saying the second and the sixth or whatever. But a good rule of thumb here is that if you want to know what the second note, for example, would be in a chord, if it's I'm not going into too deep in the chord theory here, but basically just do it's the rule of 9 basically. So you just add 7 to everything, and sorry, not the rule of 9, the rule of 7 obviously. So basically if you have the root plus 7, you get 8, which is the octave. If you have the second note and you go 7, you have 9. So 2 and 9 is the same thing, 3 and 10 is the same thing, 4 and 11 is the same thing, and so on. So if something seems confusing, just pull it back to that level. So if someone says like, oh, play the 11th, you can be like, oh, well, what's the 11th again? All right, I just deduct 7 from that. And if your math isn't horrible, you should come out with 4. So you know that the 11th is the same thing as the 4th. So with that said, let's just keep going here. So the last arpeggio is just the regular old E minor triad. So, and we do this slidey type triad. So we go down 19, 15, and then 17, and then we have 16, slide to 12, and then go 14, 14, 15, 12. So that's the whole thing. And in the tabs, I've written out all this stuff so you can see the numbers. I like to write out the intervals though within the scales. I don't usually write 9 or 11 or whatever. I just write 2 and 4 and 6 instead, just so you know. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for the lick. In terms of practicing it, just divide it into sections, and also look at the shapes here. We have this shape, the minor shape from the E minor and the B minor, and then we have major shape from G and D. So you have 2 shapes you need to worry about. So you can just take those 2 shapes and work them out up and down the fretboard chromatically. Starting down here, just go. All the way up, all the way back, and then you do the major shape. Then if you're really diligent, you can actually do the first shift here. We do that twice and move that up a half step. So you really dial those shifts in by doing that, because you also notice a lot of things that instead of just looking where the dots are, you're going to see like, oh, okay, so these are connected so that when I go up to the next shape, where my pinky was, my index finger is going to be. And things like that will be very clear to you when you move it up and down the fretboard. Also, by moving it in half steps like that, you kind of force to slow down when you do that, because you're going to be a bit confused at first, but that's great. So a little bit of confusion is great for your learning. So don't feel freaked out by that. So yeah. So try applying this to the whole lick, and just divide it up in sections. If you find that particular shift is hard, just take that and move it up and down in half steps. And I think you'll find that just doing that for a few times will make a massive difference, especially if you give it a few days. So experiment with that stuff. If you have any questions, just post them below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.